A new CBS News Battleground Tracker poll shows former Vice President Joe Biden is making gains in two key states that President Trump flipped in 2016. The presumptive Democratic presidential nominee leads in Michigan by 6 points. The president has a 1-point edge in Ohio, a statistical tie. President Trump won that state by a comfortable margin 4 years ago. Ohio is also a critical part of the president's overall electoral map in 2020. For more, let's bring in CBS News Elections and Surveys Director Anthony Salvanto. Anthony, you wrote in your report that this election is about much more than the economy. Coronavirus and race relations are also strongly tied to the vote. So how is that impacting the race in Michigan and Ohio?
Well, how you doing? And let me start with Michigan. When you look at the poll we did there, we found that coronavirus is still a big part of this vote. Specifically, you recall that the state had a tough battle with the outbreak earlier this spring. Well, voters there tell us that they, number one, feel like the Trump administration is still not doing a good job of handling it. And very specific to Michigan, voters tell us that they think the administration's policies hurt more than helped Michigan in fighting that outbreak. So there's still some lingering negativity toward the administration there that seems to be costing the president some votes. Then we see that voters tell us that they don't like how the president handles himself personally. He's got a big gap on that compared to Joe Biden. And then, look, any election that has an incumbent up for re-election is to some degree a referendum on the sitting president. So we asked people, how has the Trump administration been? Has it been better than you expected, worse than you expected? Well, for Republicans, many of them say it's been as good or better than they expected. But for everybody else, specifically for independents, they say that it's been worse than expected. So all of those factors are really weighing down the president's numbers there in, yes, a state that he closely won back in 2016, Laura.
He wants to get those independents. He wants to get those swing voters. What are voters saying in these states, though, when it comes to the economy? Because with this $600 coronavirus stimulus bonus expiring and no new bill yet approved, there's a lot of questions there. And which candidate do you think has an edge there?
Well, neither one has a really significant edge across all the components of the economy that we tested. And I think that's telling, and it's part why I say that this election is about so much more than the economy. We don't always say that in elections, but this one is. Look, when you look at voters who say, will this president's policies help or hurt us going forward? It's about split. Just about as many think that the president's policies will help the economy recover as think that if Joe Biden were elected, his policies would help their economy recover. There's a difference a little bit in manufacturing jobs in Ohio, where we see the president would still have a lead on Joe Biden on that measure. Now, that's important, especially in a place like Ohio, not only because the state is important for his electoral map, but it represents the kind of voters, working class voters, who backed him in large numbers in 2016. So a little bit of an edge there on that particular part of the economy for the president, and it could be one reason why his numbers there are still very competitive. But I will also add this, there's always that empathy factor for candidates. Who cares about people like me? And on that, we see pretty much even numbers. We see Democrats feeling like Joe Biden cares about them, Republicans feeling like the president cares about them, and that's another critical component to watch as we go forward, Laura.
And if you could, tell us exactly about those voting groups, those who believes that Biden does care about them. Where are his gains coming from?
Yeah. When we do this polling, we have talked a lot about attitudes and views, but we also sort of slice up the electorate by demographic groups. So when we look at a couple of key ones, notably the women's vote and white women with college degrees, that's a group that's been trending towards the Democrats for a few years now, and Joe Biden leads among them by very large numbers. So he's got significant gains there. But then you also look at some of the groups where the president has done very well. You look at men, for example. You look at men who do not hold college degrees. That's a group that has backed the president in large numbers across the board, and the president is still winning them. But it's not just about winning a group. Sometimes it's about margins, and Joe Biden is closing a little bit of that very large gap on the president with that group. It's enough, even though Biden is still down with them, to make up some of the overall margin in the state and give Biden a boost in the polling. Again, another sort of lesson in that is it's not always about winning a group outright. Sometimes it's just about getting enough of them, Laura.
Switching gears here a little bit, I want to ask about the protests that are taking place around the country. The Trump administration is making this a focus, but how are the voters seeing this issue?
So a couple of things on that. When we asked people to prioritize what they want the Trump administration to be doing, dealing with the protests is ranked much lower than a couple of key things. One is trying to stop the outbreak of the coronavirus, and two, trying to get economic relief into the hands of people because, as we said, the economy, the view of many, has had a downturn. So those are two things that rank higher than dealing with the protests. And I would also add that, in the grand scheme of things, we often find not only that the economy rises to a higher level, but also that there are different views among voters about what these protests represent. And we see such strong divisions both over what's happening in the protests, whether people agree with the protests, Democrats strongly support, Republicans strongly opposing, and that kind of division is closely related to vote, Laura.
Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much.